welcome to Basic Black. Some of you are joining us on our broadcast, and others of you are joining us on our digital platforms. I'm Callie Crossley, host of Under the Radar 89.7. Tonight, the Oscars, diversity and representation. We, like you, are dealing with the effects of the coronavirus pandemic and are taking precautions. We are working with limited staff, and our guests are joining us remotely. Big or record-breaking films in 2021 owe their success to opening weekend audiences that were mostly people of color, including the monster blockbuster Spider-Man: No Way Home. That's according to UCLA's 2022 Hollywood Diversity Report, released earlier this week. The UCLA report bluntly stated, people of color kept the studios afloat the past couple of years. Yet the lack of racial representation is still evident in front of and behind the camera, and in this year's Oscar nominations. While winning an Academy Award is still coveted, local film creatives are also looking for other kinds of industry recognition. Given that hashtag #OscarSoWhite is still a reality, does winning a golden statue offer a pathway to advancement for film professionals of color? Joining us remotely, Thato Mwosa, a filmmaker, and her first feature film, Memoirs of a Black Girl, won Best Feature Film Award at the 2021 Hamilton Black Film Festival and the 2021 Roxbury International Film Festival. Lisa Simmons, Artistic Director of the Roxbury International Film Festival. John Oluwole ADEkoje, a director, writer, and artistic director at the Boston Arts Academy. And Sabrina Avilés, Executive Director, Boston Latino International Film Festival. Welcome to all of you. So
Thank you.
Let's start this way, because Lisa, you said all the buzz is, everybody's talking about Oscars, and yet we have that representation problem that is still in existence. Just to set the table, the high, if we can say that, the high of representation, and still not for Latinos, before Sabrina gets in on this, during the Moonlight years, when Moonlight won the Best Picture, there's been a retraction. So this year, overall, the representation for racial representation has gone down. For women, it's gone up incrementally. That's just to set the table for people to understand. Is there a single recognition, a single nomination that you would say speaks to where the Oscars are now in terms of representation this year's? From this 2022 Oscar nominations, which one would you say is an example of where we are now, Lisa?
Oh my gosh. I mean, I think, well, I would say, Power of the Dog. In looking at what was left out and what has been nominated is hard to accept. When you have someone like a Regina King and The Harder They Fall, and has been left out of the Oscars, and you look at something like Power of the Dog that's been risen and is rising to the top of everything. I think that you can understand where Oscars are right now. And it is not in an inclusive space. And I know that it seems like it is, because you've got Denzel and you've got Will Smith and you've got sort of like the regulars, and there are women, that are at the top of that heap. But still, I feel like we have taken a step back. There has not been this recognition of the incredible work that people of color are doing, all within the industry. And I don't know whether it's because we're, on streaming platforms and people aren't getting the opportunity to see films on the big screen, and we're not getting the opportunity to flood, theaters. And, there's so much noise on platforms there. It's hard to find, content. And so, I think that might have something to do with it, but I do think that, it's exciting to see Coda, but I do think still we are in that space where Oscars is so white.
Sabrina, I'm going to go over to you, because on its face, it would look like, in terms of Latino representation, there's been a giant leap, because there's been very little, even during the years where it seemed to be a high point for #OscarSoWhite, if you can call it a high point. So what would you pick then as the one example that sort of speaks to where we are in terms of racial representation at Oscars?
Well, I think that, everybody is applauding the fact that Guillermo del Toro is nominated, but he, like his compadres, Alfonso Cuarón and Iñárritu, have been nominated. But, as a Latina living in the United States, they're clearly Mexican, and it's not to underrate their work, because Guillermo del Toro personally is one of my favorite directors. But I think that the Latinx voice, if you will, is still not as powerful, not as strong. I think, it's wonderful that West Side Story got the amount of recognition, 7 nominations, but it speaks a lot to the fact that it did, even though it was critically acclaimed, it did so poorly in the box office. And now unfortunately, it's another film like In the Heights that, because it didn't bring in the big bucks, if you will, it only, I'm sure, makes Hollywood a little bit more hesitant to fund that type of film. And I think that it doesn't bode well for us as to see that representation on screen, even though I think personally the film was spectacular. So.
John, same question to you.
I was going to say The Power of the Dog, but now I'm really leaning towards Macbeth.
Okay. Starring Denzel Washington, among others.
Yes. I appreciate that Denzel is in it, but it's a Shakespearean play that has been done over and over again, and that was another opportunity to make a different kind of film that challenges where we are today. And unfortunately, we're always reaching back. The West Side Story, we're just reaching back to get films that were already made before, and so finding new voices and pushing forward. And it's the same thing every year. It's always looking back. There's nothing wrong with looking back if there's a new analysis for it, but we have to start looking forward. And there are many opportunities that are being dropped every year because of that.
All right. Where would you say, Thato? What would be your example?
I mean, I agree with Lisa and also John. I watched Macbeth and I completely didn't understand it. And as much as I love Denzel, I'm surprised that it got some nominations. Power of the Dog, it's nice that what's her name, Jane Champion,
Yes.
is nominated as a female, because as a filmmaker director, we would love to celebrate female directors. But at the same time, I just felt that there's a lack of representation in terms of people of color. When you look at all the movies that are nominated, I'm really glad that King Richard has gotten the recognition that it's gotten. But we still have a long way. Our films are not, to get to Best Picture or get the nomination, the studio has to be behind the picture. We have to get funding to even get, we have to get funding from the studios for us to get that way. So we have a long way because we're still underfunded, we're not supported, and there's a lot of great independent filmmaking happening, but we'll never make it to the Oscars. Oscar is all about power and it's all about money at the end of the day. To get that nomination, you have to have at least anywhere from 10 million to 20 million to campaign. So when you don't even have money to make your film and you have that. So when you are not supported by studios, there's no way of just even getting the recognition you're getting. So only the filmmakers that have been making films for over 20 years are the ones that are still on the podium. We're looking at Steven Spielberg, who still gets the support and the funding, and he's West Side Story is now on the list of Best Picture. I didn't think it was that great, to be honest. I enjoyed it, but at the same time, there are other stories that were more deserving.
Well, a couple things. So Adriana DeBose, of course, her performance has been lauded, even if people didn't like the films, and she's been nominated and also won prior to this some other awards. So she could maybe win. She's up against, is she in the same category with Anjanou Ellis? I can't remember. I believe they may be in the
I
same
believe
same
so.
Yes, I
category.
think
Yes, they are.
Yes, and
Thank
Angela
you.
Ellis played the mother
King Richard.
of the Venus sisters
Sabrina and Venus, yeah.
and King Richard. Just want to note that this is the 9th nomination for Denzel Washington, making him the most nominated Black actor ever. We can take that as, and also one of the few to have crossed over several decades of acting, which is a note also that they're giving to Steven Spielberg for having directed over several decades of directing. You both, a few of you mentioned The Power of the Dog. We would be remiss if we didn't note that Jane Campion made an untoward remark toward the Venus sisters, and you know that's all under the Oscar so white umbrella. She decided to say that she admired them, but she had to compete against men, and so of course it was tougher for her. I'll take one response to that. Who wants to respond?
What is the, like, we're constantly dealing with microaggressions. Sorry, John. And I don't know why, that is not getting more play. This is like so insidious and like we are constantly fighting, like Thato saying, it's like it's hard enough to get into independent film festivals or film festivals. It's like even harder, to get to this space in the Oscars. And here you're there as a woman, as like championing women, and then you have to put Black women down. This is like, we're tired. We're tired of this.
Yes. I just want to go back to streaming, because the studios that you all have mentioned that have the power and the money, or have had it thus far, are a little bit shaken in their boots, because in many categories, the streaming service's original programming is nominated. And that's where a number of you believe there's more opportunity, even though it's still not going to be easy. So I'll start with you, John. If the streaming services win a lot this go round, what does that do in terms of opportunities for folks of color in the industry?
If I was going to predict, I would say maybe 5% more than before. The problem is a lot of these films are buried in the streaming service. So there's a lot of filmmakers who go through the film festivals that have made excellent films, and then they get into one of these streaming services, but because they don't have enough promotion, nobody knows about the film, even though the film is on these platforms. Mm-hmm. So you don't get to see the film. So there's still money involved, because somebody has to promote it and it has to be up there. The top 10, Netflix, we get to see that's the ones that people look at first. You don't go all the way to the bottom to look at what's the new stuff. So that is still a problem. And it requires a lot of PR. It costs a lot of marketing just to get those films out there. Mm-hmm. So it is encouraging to see that that's happening, but it still will involve a lot of money.
And Sabrina, you brought up a dark side of streaming, in that it's competition with independent festivals, which then takes folks of color who are behind and in front of the camera and having these stories that are very important to communities of color, pushing them out, actually, because they don't get as much attention.
I think for us, the problem with the streaming is that, not the problem, but streaming is evolving to be sort of like a Hollywood again, so that a lot of times, if we as filmmakers would all love a Netflix deal, but it's not just about hoping that they catch you at a film festival. It involves a lot of back room talk and negotiation, and in many ways you have to have some sort of representation that can negotiate that deal, if at all Netflix will notice the film. So it's about getting in the right festival. It's about getting the right representation. And again, it all requires a network of people working behind the film and a network of funding behind the film. So it's not just as easy as applying, or pitching a project at Netflix, because or any other streaming platforms. It's not as easy maybe as it was, I don't know, 10 years ago when they were growing the platform. Now it's about, can you get somebody who can facilitate that that negotiation so that your film at least gets seen, let alone picked up by a platform like Netflix or Apple TV.
And I would be remiss if I didn't point out that in 2020, when at the height of COVID, a lot of the studios, as you know, pulled their major films that they had scheduled, so they didn't want people to see them at home, and they thought they'd have a better shot later. That didn't work for some of them, but as a result of that, it made space for those films that John talked about that were buried in the streaming services, and that's how Minari got the attention that it got. It was buried, and they were looking for, where is a film that we can put on the air, but without it being a studio film. And, as you know, Minari, which focused on an Asian family moving south, and is a small family story that made a great impact once people could find it and see it.
Yeah.
Thato,
I mean,
or Lisa, go ahead. You answer.
I was just going to say, like we were talking about, this content's really hard to find. But the other thing about, film festivals and independent film festivals, were so important for filmmakers of color, is the streaming services also are swooping in, picking up these films, before that they get to do the independent film circuit. And so that's problematic. So, they're taking them, they're holding on to them. And it's only a small percentage, right? And so it's been more difficult for independent film festivals to bring in and to support and to premiere, some of these films. It's great for filmmakers who are getting that opportunity, but a lot of filmmakers are not getting that opportunity, and which is why, I think for filmmakers of color, festivals are a really important way to get your work seen and get your work known and out there, and it's a supportive environment. It's difficult. Hollywood's difficult, and I think that what Ava's doing is great in supporting Black and brown BIPOC filmmakers, and I think that's important. I think we need to continue to do that so that we can get elevated to the spaces of Oscar and and other premium and premiere shows, so that we can take home those prizes.
Can I just jump in and say something? I want to add to what Lisa's saying. For example, there's this movie that got all these accolades at Sundance called Mija. And Mija also, right, I believe, was in another high-end festival. I can't think right now which one it was. But we tried to get it to screen during our Shared Story series. And already, I think Apple TV bought it. I can't remember the platform. But here was an opportunity for this film to have an afterlife, if you will, in the film festival circuit, where it could have not only generated a buzz, but maybe reached those communities, the Latinx communities, say, oh yeah, I recognize that story. So, but as wonderful as a streaming platform is, for the film, again, going back to what John said, it'll probably get buried. And then by the end of the year, people might not even know where Mija is or where it exists, and missed out on having that kind of community outreach and connection, which is so important for us and representation.
Now, interestingly enough, and this is a category dear to my heart because it's the one I was nominated in, first African American to be nominated in documentary feature category. This is the second time in about 3 years where 4 of the 5 nominees are persons of color. And the films are generally speaking to experiences that we would all appreciate and be brought forth. Most people are focusing on Questlove's Summer of Soul, which is very fun and interesting film. My compadre, Stanley Nelson and Tracy Curry, are also in that category for ADEKoje. And then as a interesting twist in terms of mentorship and community, Jessica Kingdon's film Ascension is also in the same category, and she was in the film community project that is run by Stanley Nelson. So they're both in the same, this is how the community, feeds on each other. And the last one is a film from India called Right with Fire. The last piece, the 5th one is Flee, which is also nominated in 2 other categories. That's not one of color, but that's interesting. In the last few years, there have been quite a number of directors of color in that category, telling true stories, not fictional. Thato, what do you think about that?
I think, when you think about documentary filmmaking, there are a lot more grants available. And I think the industry is a lot more open to supporting filmmakers of color. Actually, even supporting stories of color. I don't know about filmmakers of color because there has been a pattern where, films with Black subjects are directed by, in documentary, directed by white filmmakers for the longest time. That is a problem, but the documentary industry is beginning to recognize that it's problematic. And when you look at independent, at least narrative film, as a narrative and also both narrative and documentary filmmaker, I do find out that there's a lot more money and support and nurturing in that side for filmmakers of color. So maybe that's why there's somewhat a recognition in the Oscar space. It's a lot easier. I think the industry is a lot more supportive for filmmakers of color.
Well, what you said is true. This year in documentary short, 3 of the films that have subject matter that are relative to communities of color are not directed by people of color. So it has been a problematic pattern. Yeah,
and
right.
the conversation that's been going on in the documentary place. Yeah.
Sorry, just to jump in for a second.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at African American music, from the blues to jazz to R&B to hip hop, I attribute that closer to documentary filmmaking, because you can take your camera, you can start inventing without expensive things. You can tell a story without expensive things, and that genre has been developing much faster because of that. When we come to narrative filmmaking, not that we don't have talent, it just takes more money. It's just expensive, and so being able to manipulate the little resources you have can only go so far. With documentary filmmaking, the genre is opening up so much that you can experiment and create new stories with it. And that's why we've seen a lot of new filmmakers go into the documentary world, which makes sense.
Well, John, you've said that now that the cameras are smaller and it's even more democratized, that will be the change maker on films that are to be considered for Oscar, for example, because then the money is going to come down. Speak to that.
Yeah, so nowadays the cameras are very close to each other. So even my students are shooting way better than they did 4 years ago, because they have the cameras. They're very sensitive to light. You can expose it easily. You can go out there. You don't have to go to a rental house to get a big light anymore. They can just tell their stories. And so hopefully, because of this, they get more training, because you have to put the hours in. You can't just turn a camera on and start telling a story. You need to put those 10,000 hours in. But you can start taking those 10,000 hours a lot earlier than we did. So you can start very early, and then you perfect your craft as you go along. And I think that's the opportunity that hopefully a lot of the younger filmmakers are going to have for the future.
Well, maybe
we're seeing that too. We're seeing that in the film festival space. And I also think it's that people want to, it's time for us to be able to tell our stories, and that because it is now democratized in a way that it's cheaper to be able to shoot those, we're constantly telling people, go out and tell your story. There are so many stories to tell, and not just for, white audiences or non-BIPOC audiences to see, but for us to see and understand and know, what's going on in our communities, the leaders in our communities. And I think that that's really important. And people are taken their cameras and gone out and told those stories. And it's really exciting. You're constantly learning something new. Is it a less expensive form? It can be, as Thato says, there's money available there. But I do think that we're in a time, in a space where these stories are now being uplifted, and people want to hear about them. And I think that we need to jump on this time to do that, because there are so many of those stories out there that need to be told. And, film festivals and film series and things like that can really elevate them to a space that they didn't have the opportunity to be before.
Thato,
I
you
also
want?
think,
Oh no, Sabrina,
I'm
go
sorry,
ahead. Yeah.
Tato probably had something.
No, no, I didn't. I didn't know which one of you had jumped in. Go ahead, Sabrina. Yeah.
Well, I'm just going to say that along those lines, what's happening also in documentary is that we're getting this new genre called hybrid, where there are actually narrative techniques that are being used in documentary to tell the story. And to me, as a filmmaker, and also from what I've seen as a programmer, it's really, really exciting, because it's almost a way to sort of scratch that itch, where that maybe producing a narrative is elusive in terms of funding, but then storytelling is storytelling. So if you take a documentary film, you still have to have that skill set to tell the story, and then to inject a little bit of technique from narrative, I think just makes the genre so much more exciting.
Well, I think we're seeing that in many of the nominees in the documentary feature category this year, so that's exactly right. But that's a good place for us to end this part of the conversation, because that's the end of our broadcast, the end of our show. Thank you for joining us. And now stay with us as we continue our conversation on our digital platforms, Facebook and YouTube. I'm Callie Crossley, host of Under the Radar 89.7. We are on Facebook and YouTube with our post show, continuing our discussion on the Oscars, diversity, and representation. So one thing I wanted to ask you all about how you measured representation, given that this year's producer of the event is Will Packer. That's an African American. We have 2 women of color as hosts. That's Wanda Sykes, Regina Hall, and then Amy Schumer is the third person who will be hosting the Oscars. There are a number, of course, of presenters. One new one, Sabrina, will be Rachel, who was the lead actress in West Side Story, but until people jumped up and down, was not invited to the ceremony by Disney, because I don't know why. But anyway, now she's invited, and now they've made a space for her to present at the awards. So there are all these visual touches, if you will, and to a large degree behind the scenes with Will Packer. What does that mean, I guess, in the context that we're still talking about Oscars So White? Who wants to start?
Well, what it means to me, what I look at is, even as a producer, what I look at is trying to hire people behind the scenes. Mm-hmm. So from film editors to gaffers to cinematographers, that whole thing is super white. So I'll rather see more of that. I'm not saying that is not a good thing to see more people in front of the camera, but there are a lot of people behind the camera that don't have opportunities that we have not talked about. That means a lot more, because that's how you're going to keep the industry going. That's how you're going to get people involved and then move up the ladder. Assistant cameraman becomes a cinematographer, and so on. I think that's also lacking, and we need a lot more representation there. I would like to see that more than...
I don't know, but will we assume that Will Packer would be instrumental in doing some of that behind the scenes? I have no idea how that works, but...
And I don't know. I mean, For me, it's sort of like, let's bring in Will and have him fix it. Why are we always fixing things? Right. It's like, I mean, sure, that's a great opportunity for Will. He's never done that before. He's, produced and directed some great, funny, good films. But it's sort of like, we need to fix our Oscar So White problem. So let's bring in some Black people to help, fix that. It's like, that's not the answer. And we get to entertain you by being hosts, and we get to, fix it so we look good, but that does nothing about the nominations. That does nothing about Oscar, and the Academy recognizing work that didn't get recognized. I mean, that's really where we need to be. And we need to be, as John says, recognizing cinematographers and recognizing and not sticking, awards in the closet and not giving them their due because Oscars is too long. It's going to be too long anyway, and just accept that fact and move on. It's going to be 3.5 hours anyway because people don't keep their speeches down to 1 minute. So what do I think it means is it's just like, let's bring in some Black people to help us feel better about what we did on our nominations. I'm not sure it's going to move the needle. And what's moving the needle are things like what's happening here in Boston on April 2nd, which is a whole program to help support and bring Black and brown people into the industry, a big conference that's going on April 2nd. So those are the things, and what Ava's doing to bring people in, as John says, and have them be cinematographers and having them working on the set. So there is a pipeline for people to be in those spaces. And I think that's what's important. Bringing someone on to produce the Oscars is to me a very small part of what actually really needs to be done.
Thato, before you say anything, I will say this. I was reminded in getting ready for this conversation that in 1996, there was a Hollywood blackout, so similar to, Oscar So White. That was the 68th Academy Awards, and it was produced by Quincy Jones. And the host was Whoopi Goldberg. So a little of what we're talking about now is mirrored. And the reason there was a, quote, Hollywood blackout is because there was one, I don't even know if there were any Latino people nominated, but there was one Black person out of 166 nominees that year. That was 1996. That wasn't 1926, just to be clear. So Thato, you want to jump in. Mm-hmm.
I mean, Oscars has always been predominantly white male. You go back to the percentages. I think I saw something 1994. It was 96% white male voters. So if people,
all right, let me correct you. It's 94% now. It's 94% white and 77% white men because they've had some new members join the voting membership.
We got some new people.
They have some new people. But it's still 94% white. I just want to say. So go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, when people who are gatekeepers in terms of voting are predominantly white and have a white lens, it's always like it's filtered through that lens, right? So people of color will never really gain representation, and people who are judging the films are predominantly white. And the other thing that I wanted to point out about streamers and because that's the point that I wanted to make earlier on, is in documentary filmmaking. The films that have to qualify to be nominated for an Oscar have to be in the theater.
That's right.
And to be in the theater is like, we're talking big films. My film would never had a chance to be in the theater. It's an independent film. So how many Black and brown films miss out on at least to qualify for a nomination?
Well, that's part of, that's why the film festivals, screening in theaters give you an edge. So the film festival screening in a theater, right?
Not in a.
That's right. So that is, but your point is exactly well taken. I also want to bring up another point that you all maybe find interesting. They have younger members. 14% of the 9,921 members are younger than 50.
Oh.
Just wanted you to appreciate that. Just take that in.
Is there some more information about it? Are there people of color, or
I think a lot of the new members are younger. So I think.
And what is that? And what is that supposed to do? What is that?
I don't know. But one of the things that Will Packer is doing, maybe I think he was planning to do this even before, is that there's always been that, well, who are these people voting who seem like not to be connected to, for example, films like Coda okay? Like Coda gets a big audience response, but they're like, whatever. I mean, it made it to Best Picture, but that is considered to be highly unusual. And so he's, through the evening, you can vote, the audience can vote on what they think the best film is. And so that will be very interesting,
Is that out of what's been nominated?
No,
or
no.
Okay, good.
You just,
out of
no.
Yeah.
You just put in your thing, they'll calculate it. At the end of the show, they'll tell you what came up.
Oh, wow.
Good.
Yeah.
I mean, that'll be very interesting. It's sort of what we do in independent film festival. Where, the audience
an audience award.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. But I think from a cultural standpoint, and by that I mean Oscars culture and, other kinds of culture, it'll be very interesting to see what tops off, because a lot of people are annoyed that Spider-Man didn't get nominated because they're thinking, there you go. I'm just saying. So it's a number of issues that are out there right now with regard to the membership. But yes, the youngest membership, I think, are the ones that represent more people of color. Yeah.
Right, and it's still a small percentage, right?
Right,
You
right.
still
14%.
Your voice, your voice is going to be drowned out and overshadowed by that other percentage that's making the decisions, as we have seen in what's been nominated this year. Like, how impactful has that been? Because I'm not. Yeah, I mean, I have.
So
what? I'm still skeptical, because I know that people still get their training, and then if you don't see what we're talking about, you're going to copy what you've seen.
Right.
So you might choose younger people, but you're still supporting the same system.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have question marks, but it's a good thing we have younger people. But I do know that young people like to look up to what's happening already, and so because they want to make it into business as well. So what we're talking about is kind of a revolution of thinking about how we make art, and how do we do that. And that's what the film festivals do. They nurture people and make them confident about the films that they want to make. That voice is important. And so it's a 50-50 for me, I'll put it that way.
So do you guys think that Oscars, I mean, some people think this is a sort of make or break year for the ceremony itself, but are Oscars going to remain as relevant as they have been? Or is this a kind of, we're going down the other side of the hill?
I mean,
I personally.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, I mean, they're not going to go away. They're still going to be relevant. But I think what's exciting is that you have, like, my litmus test is the NAACP awards, right? So I think that you're going to have award shows that people are going to be, okay, well, that's real, or even, the Critics' Choice Award and the SAG Awards are going to start to be elevated, because Oscars is just going to be this sort of like, okay, we know the politics. It's still the politics, but it is the Oscars. It is the Hollywood's biggest night. And, people are still going to watch, and people want to know what people are wearing, and that's going to be there. But I do think that there are these other shows that are going to let people in the world and audiences know that these are films that you should be checking out. These are really films that are making an impact and making a change. And that's through the NAACP awards and other award shows.
Right.
Sabrina?
I was just going to say that. Yeah, I was going to say that. I don't think that the Oscars are as relevant to the general audience as they are to maybe industry people.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's all kind of a dream, but honestly, for me as a filmmaker, I'd rather get into an A-list film festival. To me, that's like an amazing goal. An Oscar would be the cherry on top. But you address something at the very beginning of the show, and saying is like, what happens after someone wins an Oscar? More than likely, nothing. I mean, it's been proven that even though there's been all these actors of color that have won Oscars, generally, and anybody who's won an Oscar, generally they think that the doors will open with opportunities after that. But it's been proven that that doesn't happen. It's just sort of you're back to square one.
Yeah.
So I really do think that it's more about, like Lisa said, who's wearing what. But it's like the next day, even I find myself after I watch the next day, it's like, who won that? And so I just think it's a way of the industry patting itself on the back, but that ultimately it's not, I don't think it's as relevant to the general audience.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'd like to know from each of you who you think from folks of color will likely win. If you want to say, you can say who you think should win, but it's not going to. But I'm really interested in who you think will likely win.
I think Will Smith
I'm rooting
will
for
win.
Will Smith.
Go ahead, Thato.
I'm rooting for Will Smith. I think he did an incredible job. John, what is it? King Richard. He just took on that persona. Even his posture, the way he spoke, I think he did an amazing job, and I think he's deserving of this Oscar. And I'm also rooting for Anjuan. I think she's wonderful, not only for this particular role in King Richard, but just her body of work. She's just like she's just incredible. So I think I'll celebrate her win. I'm rooting for her too.
Okay. John? Sabrina, go ahead. Anybody? Yeah.
I'm going to be controversial because everybody's like, Ariana is going to get the Best Supporting Actress. But I even though I loved her performance, I think that Anjuan should win it. I really think she's more Ariana was amazing, but I was actually even surprised that she's been getting all these awards, and I just feel like, is that really because she did an amazing job, or I mean, is it? I just don't. I didn't find as wonderful as she was, like this triple threat. I didn't find that her acting performance was really that nuanced, and so. But I think that she'll get it. But I'm not convinced that it was an Oscar-worthy performance. I don't know. That's controversial.
I know. I think my 2 cents is that she took a role that had been played by an icon and made it her own in a really interesting way. And so that's where that's coming from. Not saying that wasn't a good job, but it got more attention because of that. That's my feeling. John.
Yeah, I think, it's a tough one. I was going to go with Dakota folks, but I'm going to stick with the King Richard. And both of them, because of the depth of work that was done there. It was like a lot of character building, and it really did not depend as much on the editing as the other films did. It was like pure performances, incredible performances. She just killed it. She's amazing. So yes, I think I will tag team on that.
Okay. Lisa, did you say? I don't think you did.
I said King Richard. I said Will Smith. I think it's definitely. I think it's time. I think he's due. I think that that he's going to win that. I hope they don't play this. You got this. So we're going to give the Best Supporting Actress award to Kirsten Dunst. I hope that it's really going to be based on people's performances, but we know how that goes.
Yeah.
But I
hope they don't give it to Denzel instead of him like the last time.
No, I can't imagine that. I mean, I feel like Will Smith's been here so many times and has had so many incredible performances that this is sort of like his time. And I don't know what he has in the coming up, but this was really, I think, a great. And it would be nice to finally give it to a Black actor for like a great work in a family role instead of someone who's like a gangster.
Right.
And, I mean, that's,
Well, I don't know, y'all. I think it's hard to be in a category with Denzel. I don't care what he's doing. I just think that's a hard category.
He was brilliant.
Yeah. No, I just think, just from an Academy standpoint, I just think that's a hard, thing. But we'll see. We'll see. I personally love Coda. I have not seen Drive My Car, which I believe is really, everybody tells me
it's really good.
Excellent. Yeah. So that's on my list to see. But Coda I just loved. And of course, that's a breakthrough, the different kind of representation because of the deaf actors. Brilliantly done. The story is so well told. And I hope that it opens up opportunities not just for Toby, who's playing the father and has gotten some recognition, but for some of the other actors as well, because they were really good.
No, I think you're right. I think we're seeing I think we are seeing a change in tide, and we're seeing more acceptance of these types of films. And I think it's really great for audiences to understand that it's not just this one thing that makes Oscar and an award-winning performance. That there are so many people that have been left behind. It's now time for people to be able to be brought forward and lifted up.
All right,
I think also,
go ahead.
I'm sorry. I think that the reason that Coda also is, I think it's a wonderful film, but, you know, I tell this to a lot of Latino filmmakers, you know, because I think, and I said this before, that we look to Hollywood as an example. And I said, and I tell them, you need to look beyond Hollywood, because what Hollywood has done with our voice specifically, I'll speak to our voice as Latinos, is sort of pigeonhole us in a box. So if you look to that for inspiration, you're just going to be emulating the same thing. That's right. So I think that something like Coda is about a deaf family, but the reason it resonated with everybody who is, you know, that is not of the deaf community is because it's about a family. And so I say to a lot of Latino filmmakers, it's, if you can make your story, it could be a Latino story, but if you can make it a human story that people can relate to, then that's the goal, and that's the appeal, and that's a success. You can't let Hollywood drive the way you tell, because that's in a different lens, in a different sphere. No, it has to be about a human story. That happens also to be Latino.
Well, we're going to leave it there, and I just want to add, as we began, the UCLA report said it's time for these studios and everybody else to invest in the people who are mostly going to see them, and that would be communities of color. I thank you all for joining me.
Thank you.